Evening, everybody. It is 10 o'clock Eastern Time. It is 7 Pacific. Welcome to the Tuesday night Keystone Big Book Workshop. I am Rob K., recovered alcoholic, sobriety date October 11th, 2013. This workshop is facilitated by Tony.R. and Katie J. We will keep everybody muted during the workshop except for the facilitators. Please note that we will be taking questions after the meeting, so please write them down so you don't forget. Any inappropriate conduct will not be tolerated, and you will be removed by one of the co-hosts. Have a great meeting. How we open this meeting is with the set-aside prayer. Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this book, my disease, these steps, and especially about you, dear God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me to see the truth. Tony, take it away, sir.
Right on. Thanks, Rob, for your service. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Sobriety date's April 8, 1989 was my first introduction to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous laid out in our basic text. My first meeting was in 1978. I was 16, so that's a while. I've been in this fellowship for quite a while, but through the application of the basic ideas and principles within our basic text, allowed me to formulate a relationship with a power greater than myself that enables me to have a daily reprieve contingent on that relationship. And if you're kind of new to this thing, you're going to we ask you to have a pen and paper, because we go through a lot of different ideas contrary to what you hear in the fellowship, and you might become argumentative within inside of yourself and stop listening to what's being presented, because most of us already know, right? So not that anybody in this group would be argumentative, right? Nobody's argumentative here, right? So a lot of times what we do is we listen with the intent of looking for people to confirm what we know, right? We don't listen with the intent of possibly learning something new. Any relapsers in the group? Any genius type minds? So we're the hardest people to talk to, because we know. We know. Right? So we look for other people that sound just like us. So we never really move past the experience that we've always been having. It is a continuation of the step one promise, which this group has reiterated and the book reiterates, which is the first contention a lot of people have and where they start losing their shit. So that's why we do the set-aside prayer. It reflects a lot of the information within our book, right? The ability to hear things, the ability to look at things differently, having an open mind. It didn't say forget everything you know, but let's revisit your understanding of these things, and let's see what the book says. Let's forget what everybody else says, right, for a second. Let's see what the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, because this is what this whole thing is designed on. Right? What is the language of Alcoholics Anonymous? If they put this thing together in such a way where they called it the basic text, which we agree on that, we've been through a lot of this study already, and that's what the book reiterates what it is. And it says it's put together by over 100 men and women, right? And their collective experience of what the problem is, what the solution is, and what the course of action is. So we see right away it's not a singular event, it's a collective. Right? And a lot of times you hear people talking about their singular experience. Anybody been in those meetings? Well, for us, right? Because a lot of us come here looking for why the hell we're doing what the hell we're doing. Anybody? And wondering why it is that we can't change it. And some of our most deepest conversations was in a mirror looking at yourself. Anybody remember those conversations? You look right into your eyes and go, what's the matter with you? And you pause waiting for an answer. There's some of the deepest conversations, like, what the hell's the matter with you? What did you go in? And anyways, and then you run the water and you can't get it cold enough. Maybe there's some people like that here. So what we're going to do is, we've been through this many a times. And what we're going to do is kind of look at something that I find hard to believe, but not really, that there's a lot of confusion around this within our fellowship. So sometimes when I go to meetings or I'm on these discussion pages that are big book or recovery based, I see the general consensus of most of the people their understanding. Does that kind of make sense? And try to ask, where does this understanding come from? And a lot of people's understanding is based on he said, she said stuff. And most of us would say that's true in the beginning, right? You hear something really good at one meeting, and then you think it's your experience, and you're sharing it at the next meeting like you've discovered it. Anybody been there? And you formulate this great talk based on everybody else's experience, right? And you're talking this, and you're sounding really good. You're sounding like that other guy that didn't know what he was talking about, but you don't know that. Now there's two of you that don't know what you're talking about, and you're both sponsoring a new guy, so now there's three of you. Pretty soon there's a whole meeting, haven't got a clue what the hell this is about, because nobody within that circle has gone through the basic text to pick up the dialogue or the basic information being passed through. How many people would say, yeah, that's kind of true, but don't like the idea of that? I spent 11 years like that. Bumper sticker, slogan, sobriety. Right? Just throw a slogan at it, right? Somewhere along the line, I actually thought there was... And you watch any newcomer, and when you reflect back, how many people sat here in a meeting while they're reading how it works? They're telling, this is how it works. And they read the preamble. This is the design of it. And you're sitting there trying to figure out how it works. The whole meeting's going on, and you're talking to the most important person in the room. You're still talking to yourself, looking for direction, not realizing it was you that got you a seat in this place in the first place, right? But these people, so you're in counsel with yourself, even in the grips of something that's happening that you have fully unaware of. Anybody like that here?
Yep.
So it's interesting. So it's pretty hard for us to really hear anything, but anybody ever notice when your pain level increases, so does your hearing? and as you start feeling better, your hearing decreases and your verbal explanation of how great you were increases. Anybody ever notice that? Anyway, so we're having fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something a little different, but the same. We're going to look at how it works, and we're going to go backwards. Right, so what we're actually going to look at is page 59. So if you got your book, if you don't got your book, remember, if we say something that's not jiving with you, just write it down beside you. We could revisit it later, but continue to move forward with us. It's kind of like, how many people's eating fish here? This is kind of like eating fish. Well, what do you mean by that? So you kind of got this plate full of beautiful food, but when you take a bite of fish, sometimes how many people's gotten a bone? So what you do, you don't continue to chew on the bone. You take the bone aside, you put it on the side of the plate, and you enjoy the rest of the fish, right? This is kind of like this. So if you get something that's kind of steel on steel or not jiving with what you believe or what you heard, keep an open mind to look at what the book says, right? And so what we do is we go over what the design of this thing is. We go back to the information in the book, not back to, well, my sponsor says, and you know who my sponsor is? Who gives a shit? If they're incorrect, they're incorrect. I don't care if they're the best main speaker in the world. Some of them are some of the best speakers in AA are the most full of shit, right? Because what they do, this theatrical, the theatrical's on cue. Make you laugh, make you cry, and it's the same talk over and over. You can listen to the CD and them at the same time. They're theatrical speakers. That's why you pay to go hear them in roundups. They're to make you feel better. These studies don't necessarily make you feel better at first, but after, it's really glad it's like a root canal. That's what this is kind of like. You may not like it right now, but later on, you really appreciate you've done it. Put your hands down. You don't need to keep your hands up. Okay, so Katie, let's start off here. So,
all right.
On 55, it's a summary of their kind of experience, and they're talking about being on this side of step 12. Not the other side of step 12, right? And the battle they're having with trying to get sober. So on 59, let's start right at the bottom, at 58. Remember.
Okay. My name's Katie, I'm an alcoholic. Page 58, bottom paragraph. Remember that we deal with alcohol. Cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us.
So we'll pause there for a second, and on your piece of paper, write down what's the most important word there. When you're hearing how it works, what are they reiterating there is the most important thing they're saying. How many people put cunning, baffling, and powerful? It's actually remember. Remember you're dealing with something you can't remember. Remember? Right? And where did they tell us that was in the previous chapters? They're saying you're dealing with something that you can't see, feel, and touch. It's a phenomena. It's something that runs with your sound thinking. It's a malady that centers in your mind that you can't see, feel, and touch. But when the switch goes, it makes good sense to you to pick up a drink in spite of everything that's ever happened to you. How many people understand that?
Yep.
That you weren't able to keep yourself sober regardless. Like the next day you're reading the events of the night before on a police report. Right? Oh my God, I did this, I did the whole shit, I did that, I got bail. And they're saying, man, I'm never doing that again. But then you go take another drink, right? And you realize you're bound to do that again because of the allergy, right? When you can't control the amounts you drink, are you prone to doing stupid shit?
Yep.
So, in order to not do stupid shit, you need to control the amounts you drink, yes or no?
Yep.
But if you can't control the amounts you drink, then you have a problem. That's why they call the first symptom in alcoholism is the allergy, right? So a lot of people think, oh, my behaviors while drinking. Well, if you're impaired, you're going to do stupid shit. Anybody? Whether you're alcoholic or not. A lot of normal people, normies out there, drink too much and do stupid shit. Anybody? But they learn their lesson from it. So do we. We learn too not to do those things. We do it differently. Anybody? How many people remember the first time you're puking in a porcelain bowl and you're begging God never to do it again? Just to get some relief, and you got acid burning through your nose and your esophagus and you're getting dizzy, and then you actually almost pass out and you fall into the toilet. Anybody have that experience? And then you fall backwards and you got the vomit and everything all over. You're lying on the floor, you come to and you got a welt on your head and you think, man, I'm never doing that again. And you don't, because the next time you remember what happened, you go down on your knees and you hug that baby. You give it a full Nelson. Anybody? Any toilet huggers here? Any porcelain huggers? Huh? And then you get that coolness on your face and you're so grateful. And then after the first couple months, you get the heebie-jeebies every time. Look, I still got goosebumps every time I look at toilets, but this is a different story. Got that nice porcelain ring. I wandered off there. You're supposed to reel me back in, Katie. So that's the allergy part. So we know if we never took a drink, we'd never trigger that. But that's what they're saying. There's another problem that centers in the mind. Are we all agreed on that? And where do we learn that? That's what the previous chapters were for. So go on.
But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now.
So we understand what that means because we went through We Agnostics. Right? So we understand what they mean by a power greater than themselves and the solution that they found in regards to applying a course of action that brings about this change. Right? So instead of calling it a peanut butter, even if we called it a peanut butter and jam sandwich, if you didn't go through We Agnostics, you would have a hard time with that. Right? So that's why it says to choose your own conception, what makes sense to you after we explain it to you, not before. Because what we have now is a common understanding. We all agree on what the solution is access to power, yes or no? And our more religious members call it a God consciousness, right? But we've all tapped into an inner resource of strength. That's information we've gotten before we even got to this point, yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we got all the same information as who? The people that put this together, and since thousands. Remember what they said here at the beginning of the 4th edition here. It says the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from what? From alcoholism. So now we become a part of the collective understanding that we all have. So it's not our understanding, my understanding, it's our understanding based on those who put this together. We agreed or disagree. So it's the collective understanding. So that means anybody talking about this is talking about the same thing, yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not. It wouldn't be different. It'd be if you're in a certain location, you had to get from point A to point B, and there was only one way to get there successfully. Everybody who's been on that road would tell you this is how you get from A to B. And if you had other people say, well, you could take road C, the people from A to B would say, every once in a while somebody gets there, but most people don't. You can take that route if you like. But remember, we're dealing with elements here beyond our ability to control, and it might cost you your very life. But you still want to take that road? You better pack a lunch, right? We're going, no, I'll take the road traveled. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And where does that stem from? That stems from the idea, I don't know if it was the First War or Second World War, where people would go through the landmines and they'd put their footing down. And they'd make it through. The first person going through would pave a path through this thing, and the second person would follow their footsteps precisely. And it would be very important to do so, wouldn't it? It would have your attention all the way, wouldn't it? And that's kind of like this path. When you understand alcoholism and what you're dealing with and what you're conflicted with, and you realize that the path is very narrow to get this thing, right? Not everybody does, but those who follow it seem to find an answer to their dilemma. Yes, no, maybe, right? Mm-hmm. And we understand what that solution is tapping into a power greater than ourselves and having the experience of it, not the knowledge of it. Big difference. How many people here had much knowledge of the steps? They could talk at great lengths about this, about that, about different things they heard in the meeting and topic meetings. That's not what this is about. It's about an experience. Is an experience a lot different than knowledge?
Definitely.
Huge. How many people could say they had vast knowledge of these things that they talk about in meetings? And that's why it's baffling when we continue to realize, so, well, I've done the steps. What we mean by that is I've talked about the steps. Right? I've talked with other people who's talked about the steps, and I've kind of did this or I kind of did that, but I don't understand why I'm drinking again, right? And so we think it's back on us. But when we go through here, we know exactly why we're drinking it, because we haven't found a solution sufficient enough for us to recover from the illness that we're afflicted with. So we don't have it, it has us. We kind of agreed on that?
Yeah.
And that's what the first half of How It Works is talking about. That there's no way out of this thing. If you have this, you're kind of much hooped. Without help, it was too much for us. So because it reiterates the step one promise. So if you have a pen and paper, write down what the step one promise is. What do they summarize is the outcome of step one. What are you agreeing to? The basics of it. And this is it. This is where a lot of people start losing their shit. Right? Because they don't understand what's being said in the book. Is that relapse, what you're agreeing to in step one is that you're going to relapse again. Mm-hmm. The promise of step one is relapse. What confirms step one is relapse. How many people have a hard time with that? Because if it didn't, then you wouldn't need a solution to it, would you? So a lot of people don't understand, right? Because their mind won't allow them to understand the nature of alcoholism, right? And so we're starting to get into this thing. So remember, they said without help it was too much for us. Remember, we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and power. We understand what that means because of the malady, as explained on what page? 23, 24, and from 33 to 44 explains this condition that precedes a relapse. Precedes means just beforehand, not leading up to, just beforehand. Because most of the time we can be our own defense. No, I'm not drinking based on experience. How many people's been there? And then something happens and you're drinking. Everybody around you goes, what are you doing? Having another one. Why? How many people have been there? Kimball, I bet you once or twice, right? And we're indignant about them being indignant. I think back on some of my episodes. Anyhow, 11 years in and out, like it makes for a funny story. Tragic at the time, but looking back, funny now, right? Right? Okay, I'm not pointing at nobody. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon.
So why is it? Because what do we need to achieve? What do we need to experience? Is this access to power? Yes or no? And the byproduct of that, right, is a psychic change or spiritual experience. So what happens first, the relationship or the psychic change? The relationship happens first. And that's what this course of action's for. That's what this whole book is for, is to enable you to have an experience with this access to this power that's deep down within you, which is within each and every one of us. Not some of us, all of us. Where's the access within? It needs to become personal to me. I need to know how to locate this thing that they laid out for me, right? So that's why they're saying that if I stop anywhere along the line, which how many people have done here? We think it's about feeling better, not getting better. How many people got feeling better and started slacking off? That desperateness started to dissipate. Come on, you can be honest here. How many people realize, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. And you tell everybody around you. 2 weeks later, it's kind of like, that was kind of drastic. I am doing anything. Look at the meetings. I'm putting on coffee. I'm doing this. Because you know why? And this is the truth. And you could argue about it later. You know why our experience starts to dissipate in the desperateness of our pursuit of a solution? Because we never fully did step one. See, a lot of people, including me, will admit that I have a problem. How many people here admit that they have a problem? Mm-hmm. But they never really did step one the way they did it, or they outlined it. And we'll go to an example of that in a minute. A lot of people think it's the same thing. The first step in recovery is admitting you have a problem. No, that's the first indication that you need to seek help as you have a problem. That's why somewhere along the line it says, under the lash of alcoholism, we're driven to AA. And there we discover, we're told the fatal nature of our situation. So, the first 100 men and women are at this place, right, of asking for his protection and care with complete abandon. Notice it didn't say surrender. It said abandon. Abandon means the willingness to move in a new direction. I've been moving this way. This is the road I've been on, but I'm willing to move in a whole different direction. Remember, we have two alternatives. One is to go on, meaning I'm already there, to go on to the bitter end. And the other is to accept spiritual help. So when does this change happen? The moment I accept spiritual help, or as the result of these steps? So we see is based on the conclusion of it. Well, what makes you say that? So here's the first thing we're going. Here are the steps. Go ahead.
Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery.
Who took? They took, and since anybody who's gone through this course of action has taken the same thing. That's why they made that statement in the 4th edition, is here are thousands of men and women, right, who have recovered from alcoholism. This is the program, or this is the course of action that we all take, not some of us. And if we're all taking the same course of action, will we all have the same understanding and experience?
Yeah, we should.
It may vary to the impact of it, but that's usually derivative of how well we do step 1. Step 2 and step 3 is the actual impact. And they talk about that where? In the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. That we'll have different experiences based on where we're at, or the gift of desperation. You hear people say that, right? Right? G-O-D, the gift of God. The gift of desperation. G-O-D, gift of desperate. That is the gift of God, right? You can have all the desperation in the world without a solution. It doesn't mean shit, does it? How many people here have been desperate?
Yep.
So desperate you took another drink. I mean, that's right? So without a solution, we're still in the same boat, and that's what they're saying here. So here is the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. What's the first thing they did?
1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives could become unmanageable. So
they said they were, meaning at some point in the process, they had to admit they are. Mm-hmm. So if you're new, you are. They're talking past tense because they have a solution now. They were powerless. They're no longer in the same condition they were when they started this thing. How many people find that surprising? So right away, how many people sat down, well, it's a we thing. They look up at the board and say we. No, unless you do this thing, you're not having the same experience as them, are you?
No.
So the second thing they did was, but we're going to get that probably next week. So we admitted we're powerless over alcohol, / that our lives had become unmanageable. It's an equal statement. That's my wife telling me. Two things mean of equal importance. So when most people talk about the unmanageability, they talk about after they're drinking. Anybody ever hear that? As long as I don't take the first one, I won't be unmanageable. My unmanageability comes when I pick up. Anybody ever hear that? That's not what they're saying. My unmanageability is I don't pay my bills on time. Anybody ever hear that? Or I don't show up to work, or this. They put their immaturity or behavioral problems as the unmanageability. But most of the world has those problems. Don't they? Mm-hmm. So what is it that they're agreeing to that they had that made them powerless over alcohol and made their lives unmanageable? I need to, pardon?
Both symptoms.
Yes, but that's it. So I need to break that down. How do I break down what they're talking? I need to go back through the book to see what they're talking about. And how important is that? Well, if you go to page 30, if you go to page 44, you see how important this is, because the rest of the book after this is dedicated toward moving toward a solution. And they break down the human condition going through We Agnostics in page 60 to 63. They start talking more about the human condition, not alcoholism. Right? They talk about what most of the world seems to have conflicted with them, or the problems that they have. But that's a different conversation. Here we're going to look at what they admitted made them powerless over alcohol and made their lives unmanageable. And it's very clear. Once you understand it, that makes sense. But if you're gathering your information from everybody around you and you're trying to go with sound bites or what makes the most sense, then we're going to have a lot of different opinions or ideas about this, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. But if you go back to the basis of what they're talking about, then it becomes more clear. So what's the first, page 44, what's the first half of the paragraph saying?
In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic.
Yeah, and have they done that?
Yeah, they have.
So they said we've learned something about alcoholism. How many places in there when they were talking about alcoholism that they describe alcoholism as a behavioral problem or something that grew on me growing up as a result of my childhood?
Never.
Right? But how many people heard that? I'm an alcoholic because of where I grew up, or the things that happened to me, or I'm an alcoholic before I ever drank. Impossible. The first symptom they talk about in the book that makes you alcoholic is the allergy. And who told us that was the doctor, and the doctor's opinion. Right? That we had to believe that the body of the alcoholic was quite as abnormal as his mind. How many symptoms are they talking about there? 2. So we realize that there's 2 symptoms in alcoholism, not 150. Why do you do that? You hear people, I do this because I'm alcoholic. I do this because I'm alcoholic. My sponsor says, no, you don't do that because you're alcoholic. You do that because you're still an asshole. I didn't like. He was insensitive. Like the guy was insensitive the way he talked. Or you do that because you're immature. You don't do that.
That's what you say to me.
Yeah.
No, you do that because you're immature.
That's not. So alcoholism is you either found a solution to it or you haven't. So in the preceding chapter, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we've made clear the distinction between alcoholic and non-alcoholic. In order to understand what they're fully talking about, will I actually have to read what they're talking about and go through the process in previous chapters, including the doctor's opinion, the forwards, and the spiritual appendix in the back of the book? Will I have to have all the same information as they do?
Yep.
Or did they say, we're hoping by this time, after you've gone to all these meetings, they've made clear the distinction between alcoholic and anonymous. You would have never come up with this stuff. There's no way. How many people sat in meetings and came up with this stuff? Oh, or in the bar, you're drinking. Oh, I did step one before I got here. Yes, I was sitting at the table with my buddies and said, Tony, why you drink the way you do, you look like you suffer from a phenomenon of craving. That's why you can't control the amount you drink. Pass the picture, right? And Tony, since you made that solemn oath last week, why you're unable to stop is because you have this malady that centers in your mind. Unless you have this entire psychic change or spiritual experience, you'll continue to drink with us from here on out. Never have any of my friends ever said that. My friends have said to me, you crazy bastard, you got to stop coming to the clubhouse and you got to go to meetings, right? Or we got to discharge you from the army. You can't be loading up weapons like that, regardless if they're blanks and firing them at people. There's something fundamentally wrong with you, right? In addition to being an alcoholic, but that's a different meeting. Okay, so then as we back up, they talk about this thing on page 43. What would make my life unmanageable then? If it's not the setting of the alarm clock and my job and all these, what is it in regards to alcoholism that would make my life unmanageable in regards to the two symptoms being presented as the illness of alcoholism? Remember, what they talked about here is if we go to page 30, then we'll back up here, is a lot of people think there's three symptoms or all these different symptoms in regards to alcoholism. The book's very clear how many symptoms there are, right from the beginning of this thing all the way through. So, more about alcoholism, page 30, talks about what? More about alcoholism would be talking about what? More about alcoholism, wouldn't it?
Probably.
So, more about something that they've already been talking about. And they're going to break it down to its clearest denomination, right? Does that kind of make sense? So what are the two things they've been talking about so far? Is something that happens in the body and something that happens in the mind. Sober. Have they not?
Yeah.
So they're going to go with their experience of what they've kind of seen working with people and in their own experience. Most of us, what?
Page 30, most of us had been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics.
So what does that mean? So there must be a classification that determines whether we're a real alcoholic or not. So circle that. Because most of us had been unwilling to admit that. And if you listen to meetings, once you understand what they're talking about, you'll hear that in meetings all the time. You'll hear 98% of the people in meetings will not address this thing that makes us a real alcoholic, or this thing that places us beyond human aid, or this thing that happens stone cold sober. Most people will not address it. Most people will call it the obsession, and it isn't the obsession. Because the obsession is in association with somebody who hasn't done step one yet. Yes or no? Because if you're still obsessing about the idea of somehow, someday, to be able to drink and control your drinking, right, with impunity, have you done step one? No, you haven't. Some people say, well, what makes you say that? Well, let's read. Don't ruin the surprise now, okay?
No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows.
True or false?
Yeah.
How many people like to think they have a mental health issue here? I mean, we don't. Everybody around us knows it, but I mean, we don't like to think it. Do we? But ask anybody around us, something ain't right with that person. They ain't quite right. Like, you're begging them. It's not running out of your nose for another chance. A week later, you're back in the bar again, phoning them for another 20. Anyways, go ahead.
Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people.
So if you're consciously thinking that there's got to be a way I can control this, that's why they talk on the next page, drinking wine only, doing this, doing... How many people have been there? I'll eat, I'll have a glass of water between, maybe I'll try a bit more methamphetamine, maybe I'll try this, maybe I'll try that, maybe it's those people I was drinking with, maybe I won't go... Like, we try ways to try to drink without consequence. Because how many people are here, honestly, okay, let's be honest now. How many people are here because you're drinking or because of the consequences? How many people are here because of the consequences? That's what gets your attention. I'm not here because of my drinking. And that's good. I like drinking. Anybody like drinking here? I mean, other than my liver, my pancreas, and the yellow kind of tint that I'm developing, it's been okay. and the green mile and tripping and shitting myself, but other than that, it's okay, right? Everybody's ever been so sick? We're not going there. Anyways, could drink like other people.
Should we keep going? The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker.
Not every alcoholic. Every abnormal drinker. Yeah. So some people are able to change or curb their lives. Remember that one guy who stopped drinking until he retired? Right? Another guy, I know people who came to AA who are drinking wine, who has some emotional problems, who used to stay there. They're able to change given good reason. Anybody know people like that? Mm-hmm. Anybody try to be like that?
Yeah.
I have good reasons, right? Like, as long as I don't get in trouble, I'll be okay. Anybody? Right? Everybody ends up in jail. No, they don't. We do the everybody statements. Everybody we know, but not everybody, right? So here, this person is still trying to drink with impunity. Remember the doctor talked about that? How many people here had tried to drink with impunity? Mm-hmm. As long as you're drinking with impunity, would you have come to AA because you're drinking? If you're able to maintain your job, your relationship, and had no consequences, would you have sought help? There's a lot of people who are out there who don't have consequences, tangible ones that got their attention right away. They're declining their health, their bills, their social status, all these things. All these things are declining, but on a slow progression. I remember, guys, that when I was 15, the guy lived down the street. He would sit, he would go to work, come home, and he would sit there and drink a 12 every day. Every day, and smoke cigarettes, pass out on the couch in his underwear, right? I was dating his daughter back then. He'd sit there and he'd rub his eyes. He'd sit there, smoke and drink. Right? Day in and day out. Right? No, nothing tangible, but we see the deterioration. And that's what they're talking about. Some pursue this into the gates of insanity and death. They will die of alcoholism, but they won't seek help. So we're fortunate enough that the consequences have got our attention, and somewhere along the line, somebody pointed us in the direction of Alcoholics Anonymous, where something inside says, I want a different story. How many people have been there? Right? So we're fortunate enough that the allergy was so pronounced within us that we could not drink without consequence. It's the consequences that got our attention to an underlying problem, which is the allergy. Yes or no? So these people aren't there yet. They're still obsessed with the idea that somehow, someday they could control and enjoy their drinking. So if you're obsessed still with the idea of drinking, that means one of two things. One, you haven't done step one, or you don't understand step one. Because once you understand you have the allergy, right, that cannot safely drink, right, because of this thing, that there's always going to be consequences. Okay, Cosmo. My rescue dog. Okay, then what? Does it say?
The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death.
Who never end up in AA.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We know a lot of people are still drinking themselves to death. Anybody? Mm-hmm. Anybody know somebody like that? But they don't think it's bad enough to really do the tragic thing of wanting to quit. That's kind of tragic. Like, I mean, well, easy. Like, that's strong. Like, that's kind of scary, isn't it? Because that's been our only solution. But when the consequences get so bad that you can't go on, then it's kind of like, okay, you know what? I need to find something different because I don't want to die an alcoholic death. Right? And I don't want to live the way I've been living anymore. How many people have been there or are there? Right? Okay, so what do?
We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics.
So what did they have to do? They had to learn, right? learn what? That they had to fully concede their innermost selves that they were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. That's step one. I hear people say, no, that's the steps before the steps. No, there's no such thing as the steps before. The steps before the steps is you're still drinking out there. Yeah. Right here, you're learning about your illness. What are you learning is that we're bodily and mentally different than our fellows. In order for them to do step one, they had to fully concede to their innermost selves that they were alcoholic. Yes or no? Yes. So the rest of this chapter is dedicated to reinforce what they were conceding to. So as we went through from page 30 to 33, they talk more on the allergy, right? And then they shift the conversation in 33 to the malady. If we're planning to stop, right?
Yeah. Middle of the page. If we were planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol.
That's to concede to that idea that I can never safely drink again. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to drink again. It means that I understand I can never safely drink again, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people think when I concede to that, I'm never drinking again. It doesn't say that. I had to concede that I have this condition. But the problem with that condition is knowing that I can never drink again is only a part of the problem. Remember that they talked about that on page 22, 23 was the introduction to the idea that the doctor talked about in the doctor's opinion, that there's something psychologically different about these people in their thinking. Right? That this thing is repeated over and over. What is? The experiment of taking that drink. Once this thing clicks in their brain, they take a drink again, a drink they see others taking with impunity. They go through a well-known stage of a spree, emerging with a firm resolution not to drink again. Remember, the doctor witnessed that as a characteristic of those who were afflicted with alcoholism, right? Mm-hmm. He says the only thing that seemed to save these certain types was an entire psychic change or spiritual experience. Why does a person need that? Because their problem is sober. They keep drinking again. Right? Where did it say that? Page 22, 23. The main problem of the alcoholic centers were in their mind. They call it a malady. And they go on to explain that. So here they start explaining this thing. And if I can't stay sober, would that make my life unmanageable?
Sure does.
How many people have been doing good here for a period of time and then found themselves drinking again? And then all hell broke loose. Then you end up in that place of being remorseful with a firm resolution not to do it again. You're back talking yourself in front of the mirror again. Right? Anybody? How many people have been there? And then you exert self again. Remember Bill's story? He exerts self again. Everybody was happy to the fact that he meant business this time, and so he did. The goose hung high. How many people have been there? The goose hung high. The displaying, we call that the chip hung high now. Look at my 3-month chip. They used to call that the goose hung high. Now it's the prized possession. That's what the goose hung high mean. They put the prized possession in the window that everybody went by the butcher shop. They'd see the prize goose there, right? And it'd be a position of wow to be able to afford. Remember that Christmas story? Go get the best. Remember that whatever? I forget that movie. Anybody remember it? Anyways, the Christmas past with the chains and all that shit. Come on, work with me. No, you're gonna let me hang out there for a while. Anyways, so
way older than me.
I know, yeah. So you think, okay, so they go on to talk about here young people, or people not that afflicted within this illness yet, who have never really experienced the ringer, right? That they talk about. Go ahead.
Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they can stop, as he did, on their own willpower.
So now, in meetings, how many people do you hear talk about this idea of stopping on your own willpower? As long as I don't take the first one, I'll be okay. How many people said that? As long as I don't pick up, I'll be... What you're saying is, I'm relying on me. As long as I don't pick up the first one, my life won't become unmanageable again. So my problem is after I drink. So who do I get to rely on not to drink? Me. self-based recovery. Now, if you listen to a lot of meetings and a lot of chat, there's people are under the impression, because A, they don't understand step one, or B, it doesn't apply to them, that they can keep themselves sober. Why? Why can they keep themselves sober? And this is where they start answering that why we're different than other people, right? What makes us powerless over alcohol is not only the events that happen after we take a drink, is the events that happen stone cold sober. How many people here were sober the last time they picked up a drink? Yeah, stone cold sober, right? And how many people remember before that you were never going to do it again? So, okay, and that's why they say that if we never took a drink again, then we'd be okay. But the problem is we keep taking that drink 3 months, 6 months, 5 years, 2 years. Because given good reason, a lot of us can stop on self-will or based on our own experience. Anybody here? Would you like a drink? No, I remember what happened to me the last time. No, I don't want one. And then somewhere along the line, something switches. And what is this that makes us different than other people? Somewhere in the progression of alcoholism, this thing happens. So even though I may have had the allergy way back, the first time, looking back, diagnosing myself, I was probably 15, the first time I realized that quench for the next drink. Or I consciously wanted another drink before I was finished the first drink. I don't remember that any other time, that focus. Before I'd get a drink, I'd be okay with it, right? But at that time when I was working, when I was in foster care, I remember this guy saying he didn't like the taste of beer. And I remember levitating toward it, like moving toward him, because we all got 2 beers while we were working in the fields. That he would give me the half beer that he didn't finish and the additional beer. Right? Why is it that thirst that started back then? Or getting manipulative to get another drink. I remember that starting back then too. Anybody? When you start looking to progression. So it doesn't matter the first time I had a drink. You hear people say, oh, it's the first drank. Well, first drink I had, I was still in diapers. Everybody laughed because I got a little drunk in diapers and I was falling down and stuff like that. And I shit my pants and it's been that way ever since. No, and I don't remember what happened. So my mom says I was 2 at a party they were having, the band in the house and all this. I just grabbed the beer, started drinking it. I mean, and it's been all that way. But the first time I felt the allergy, that need for another drink, that's when alcoholism started. Does that kind of make sense? I'm allergic to pistachios. It's not the first time I ate pistachios. It's the first time I started having an abnormal reaction. So when we look at the allergy and I look back, I said, this is when it started. But I was able to stop for a period of time given good reason, but I'd always go back to it because I like the sense of ease and comfort. It seemed to contain the promises in every drink I had. Anybody like that here? Then I started getting in trouble, right? My first meeting, I was 16, and I found a new way of life, and I was really enjoying it, and then I found myself drinking again. Right? In school, things are fantastic. Life, and I found myself drinking. It was like I was never in AA. And this went on for 11 years. 11 years of good enough reasons to come to AA, but nothing within AA sufficient enough to keep me here. And when did this started happening? This symptom started happening when I was 15 without realizing it. And what symptom is that? That makes my life unmanageable, makes me powerless over alcohol, which is the second symptom in alcoholism. They call the malady on page 23, not the obsession. They never use the obsession as an example in alcoholism anywhere in our literature, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. In working with others, not once do they ask you to describe this condition. Right? So what is it? Young people.
Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they can stop, as he did, on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it, because none will really want to stop.
True?
Hardly one.
True? How many are true? Like, ever had a bit of problem, but it's kind of dropped the idea of stopping. Wait a minute. Right?
Forever. Because of, hardly one of them, because of the peculiar mental twist already acquired, will find they can win out. Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, have been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who have been drinking 20 years.
And the helpless part is I continue to start drinking when I don't want to drink. Anybody like that here, looking back? I keep on, like, even though I was never going to, so now as we go through this, they talk about here, remember when I said circle on page 30? Right? We're real alcoholics. Nobody likes to think they're bodily and mentally different than that they were real alcoholics. Right? Because to think that, to know that, and concede to that would give you that feeling of panic. To know what you're up against. Right? Remember that guy that you felt like the gates of hell closed on him? When he says, is there any exceptions to this thing? And the doctor said, no. Well, then he said, yeah, there's been some exceptions, right? So here, on page 34, it reiterates this thing, and I'm just going to hit some, as we look back. What are we looking back on is this particular mental twist. How many times did I promise not to do it? How many times would I pass the lie detector? How many times before coming to AA that I found myself drinking against my own will? You hear people say, I've never relapsed. Then you don't understand step one. Because if you've never relapsed, then you wouldn't need a spiritual solution, would you? You could rely on you. If you can keep yourself sober, why would you pursue this solution? Let's get honest here. If you can keep yourself sober, would you be in this big book study pursuing a spiritual solution? No. I'd be sitting in a meeting showing my chip, the goose hung high, how great I am. I'd like to talk about me and how fantastic I am. And if you want what I got, phone me more often and I could talk more about how wonderful I am. And let me help direct your life because I've been doing shit with mine. Sorry, I had a moment there. Okay, as we look back, we're looking for that symptom, right?
Okay.
As that's worth reading again. As we look back.
As we look back, we feel we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could stop on our own willpower.
Stop on our own willpower, meaning that this illness was present long before I suspected it. And I'm the last one to realize the grip hold it has on me because everybody around me already sees it. Mm-hmm. Anybody here the last one to really see the devastation in your life, but everybody around you was totally aware of it? By the time you became aware of it, you became in the same understanding as everybody else around you, right? And it says there, to stop. If we could stop, then we wouldn't be a real alcoholic, would we? We wouldn't be powerless over alcohol, would we? You'd just be allergic to it. Like I'm allergic to pistachios, but there's no part of my mind that ever tells me it's a good idea to eat them. Even with some coaching from my wife after signing the insurance papers, I still don't see any benefit from eating them. She goes, maybe you're not allergic. I don't care. It's not that important to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's go here. For those...
where's that? Oh, for next paragraph. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether.
That's a good question, right? Because if I can't drink moderately because of the allergy, and there's always consequences, anybody, the heartache, the pain, nobody needs to tell us. How many people remember sitting there in our own despair, cracking another beer or having another drink, and just totally, phew, that loneliness of despair and the four horsemen. I remember that, and the pain that we caused everybody, and that feeling from when it turns from disgust and resentments to pity. How many people remember those looks? I've had people, looking back, I didn't realize that at the time, sitting across from me, started crying from my condition at 25 years old. People that knew me, looking at me, and I'm explaining how I still got it together, a little bad luck and a little real delusional, and they're crying at the state I'm in. And I thought it was because I was being profound. Okay, go ahead.
We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not.
That's one of the questions, right? Like, you need to determine, because if your past is determined that you kept on drinking in spite of everything, you've done, the treatments. Remember Bill? How many times did Bill go to treatment? 3 times, right? First 2 times he kept on drinking in spite of all that, in spite of the help, in spite of the support. It wasn't until Ebby took him through a course of action that he had a psychic change or spiritual experience. So when they say spiritual help, they're talking about specific spiritual help, enabled to create a psychic change or spiritual experience. Because remember, they used an example of that guy who had religious convictions, but it didn't spell the necessary spiritual experience. They're very specific about this thing. Go ahead.
There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible.
Yeah, impossible means if I start drinking after 3 months or 6 months, I wasn't successful staying stopped. We think we are. Oh, look how good I did before I got 3 months. Stopped means stopped, including birthday, holidays, and weekends. Stopped means stopped. When I made a decision never to eat pistachio again, I haven't ate them again. Stop means stop, doesn't it? But we think we've done good because we've done 3 weeks or 3 months or 2 years. If you started again, that means you're just having a liaison. You're in between drinks. You never actually found a solution to your dilemma if you started drinking again, did you? So you're actually in between drinks. Your illness was lying dormant till it presented itself. And how did it present itself? As the insanity that precedes the first drink. Go ahead.
Yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism, as we know it, the utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or wish.
Cunning, baffling, and powerful. They just covered the baffling part. The utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. You could surrender, you could hit bottom, you could do all that stuff. It isn't sufficient enough for you to stop you from drinking again. The only thing that they had to offer is one, entire abstinence through what? Through a spiritual course of action, through a psychic change or spiritual experience. And then we obtain a daily reprieve. Yes? No?
Yep.
And that's what they're offering here, is a daily reprieve from what? From this illness. It gets removed. It no longer exists, because as long as it exists for us, we continue to drink. This thing has to be removed. Right? Okay, go ahead.
How then should we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us?
One of us is that condition of a real alcoholic, of the mental twist that precedes a relapse into drinking. It's not the allergy, because if that was just it, then just don't drink. It'd be a 1-page book, wouldn't it? Just don't drink.
Stop it.
Jeez, I didn't need to come to AA for you people to tell me that just don't drink. I had the whole world telling me don't drink. Right? Okay, so we'll finish this with the homework. Go ahead.
The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful.
The experiment. Because we already know if you're like one of us, you're not going to be able to do it. How many people's passed the experiment of being able to stay stopped on their own experiences and own will? No. How many people drank again against their own will? Against the experiment didn't go good, did it? It's like the guy putting an ounce of whiskey in his milk. That went so well, I thought I'd have another. Okay, go ahead.
The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe...
Okay, hold it. So what are they going to do? They're going to describe the characteristic that makes one a real alcoholic. Mm-hmm. One of us. Didn't say some of us. One of us. One of who? Those that put this thing together. Those who put Alcoholics Anonymous together. Whether you're one of us or not. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. You don't even have to be alcoholic. Do you? You don't even need a solution. So there's a group of people who are like us, who this book describes that need a certain solution if they're going to survive this thing. Just don't do it isn't it. Just go to meetings, meeting makers make it isn't it. We don't stay sober under any and all conditions, do we?
Nope.
We drink under any and all conditions. That's what it's saying. Left to our own devices, we don't need a condition. Our condition's a condition that needs conditioning. Anybody here? So it's not external circumstances why I keep drinking. It's internal that I can't see, feel, and touch. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. For obviously this is the crux of the problem. And what's the main problem? Is the malady that they're expanding on. And so how many times do they use the obsession as an example of that?
Not once.
Not once. Because they need you to see this condition is beyond your ability to see when it's happening. And when it's happening, it's making sense to you. That they further, and we're going to close with this, this is what makes them powerless over alcohol in that statement and their life unmanageable. So when they, and how it works, said, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable, they were suffering from this illness and yet to apply a solution to it back then. But through applying this solution to it, they're no longer powerless over it because they're no longer suffering from it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? And here's the condition that they, is the summary of this condition that made them powerless over alcohol and their lives unmanageable. Page 37. This is the guy that put an ounce of whiskey in his milk. Right? They're just talking about, as an observer, you think it's stupid. But as the guy doing it, it's making perfectly good sense to them. And we all have our own experiences with that. How many people, looking back, remember them, you picking up a drink, right? Being Alcoholics Anonymous, going, how crazy was I? What the hell's the matter with me? Looking back on it and try an excuse to it. But there's no excuse. Right? The excuse is this condition. And this is the summary of it. Go ahead, whatever.
Whatever. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity.
The thinking that precedes a relapse into drinking. Because obviously this is the crutch of the problem. This is what makes us powerless over alcohol, is this condition. Because if we were able not to take the drink, then we wouldn't be powerless, would we?
No.
So if I could keep myself sober on step one, then step one wouldn't apply to me, would it? Interesting. Kind of goes contrary to a lot of the shit we hear in meetings, isn't it? I do step one every day, and that does what? It's like admitting you have diarrhea. Every day I admit I have diarrhea, and that does what? Okay, go ahead.
How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? You may think this is an extreme case. To us, it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us.
Not some of us. How should we determine to our readers whether they are one of us? Well, this is it. Is this malady, this thinking, this thing that places us beyond human aid. This is the characteristic of every single one of us. Not every single one of us in AA. Every single one of us that has self-diagnosed as an alcoholic. Or if you observe somebody with these symptoms, you would see these characteristics of their inability to stay sober. How many people have been to meetings and you watch that person continuously relapse over and over again? How many people have been that person? And how many people try to guilt shame you into finding recovery? Just don't do it. Just surrender. You haven't done step one. You hear all this shit. What it is I haven't found a solution sufficient enough for me to experience a psychic change or spiritual experience. Because AA is designed for relapsers. It's not designed for people who can stay sober. Are we agreed or disagreed? But you would think it was designed for people who could stay sober because we're the only ones feeling guilty. Who? The alcoholic. I'm sorry, I'm coming back. Well, that's what you're supposed to be doing. The book already told us that we know you can't stay sober. I don't know why you're surprised. We're not. Here's your chip. Sorry. Anyways, go ahead.
We've sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink.
Phenomenon, unexplainable event that happens in our brain that we try to explain. It's unexplainable. You're not right in your head when you take that drink again. You're doing an act against your own will. They call it a phenomenon. We don't understand this click, this thing that happens with us. But we know that once these same people experience a say change their spiritual experience and this click is removed, they seem to do okay because they obtain a daily reprieve from this thing, this condition that gets removed. That's the promise. It's not a step 10 promise. It's a promise of the summary of this course of action. Mm-hmm. So what is the solution of step 1 is step 2, is it not? The psychic change of spiritual experience obtained through a course of action by obtaining a personal relationship with a power greater. So what's the confirmation of step 2 is step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result, not a result, the result of these steps, right? Where do we learn that idea, the possibility? That was step 2. So what's the confirmation of step 1 is drinking again. The confirmation of step 3 of this relationship is step 11. Through a course of action, obtaining this thing. I had a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us. I didn't see too many people losing their shit today, which is good. So thank you so much, and hopefully that added some clarity, because it's so important just to get back to the language of the book, right? What does the book say, right? And then we could build on those things. So thanks for joining us. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Katie. May the force be with you. Live long and prosperous.
Thanks very much, Tony, and thanks very much, Katie. Everybody, the Keystone Group has been in operation for a year now. In that time, all the money that is taken in through our PayPal account is sent to GSO in New York in order to keep the brick and mortar going. So if you can give, please look in the chat. You'll find our PayPal account. Also, we have a YouTube channel. Go to search Tony.R. Vancouver. There's over 80 talks in there. It's a great resource for a better understanding of stuff in the Big Book. Also, stick around after this meeting. Tony will be taking questions. Also, Big Book worksheets. We have Big Book worksheets, so you can find them on the YouTube channel, or you can email me.
Rob, one second. Hey, we don't make no money off of that. There's no commercials. We make no money. It's strictly to help for 12-step work. For people that are in camp or people who want a better understanding, we make no money off of that. And nor will we ever make money off of this thing. This thing has saved my life, right? And to make money off of this thing would be a detriment. And it would be an insult to those who carried this thing to me. And it would be a real... It's just not what we do, okay? Sorry for interrupting. Some people get under the impression of this thing. Movement.
That's what we're all about. We also have a Facebook group. It's called the Big Book Step Study Discussion Group. You can find all our meetings that are coming up. The Keystone Group has 16 meetings a week. Friday night is the ladies only, and twice a week Art runs the Big Book Worksheet Workshop. So,
dedicated to 12-step work and be of service. That's what we're about.
Exactly. And you know what? My email is in the chat. If you need anything, any information, please don't hesitate to reach out and touch base, because we're here to help in any way we can, except financially. Sorry.
Art might have a 20, but I mean... You still paying people to go to your group or what? That's what I hear. You guys got to go check it out.
So have I forgot anything, Tony?
No, just the most important part of this whole thing.
God.
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.